Do we have another question?
How does Warhol's art fit into the American educational tradition in terms of having an educational system that is probably the most efficient educational system in the world in brainwashing people almost until Vietnam? After Vietnam, I think this changed significantly. But I see in Warhol maybe a reaction to this brainwashing tradition in terms of U.S. education. He changes things, he sees things differently, and I think this is something very special in terms of the way Americans or U.S. citizens react to the way they have been educated. So basically, how does Warhol fit into this educational tradition in the U.S.?
Well, a gallery director named Alexander Yolas once said that Andy helped to liberate America from its Puritanism. And so I think part of his educational merit derives from the fact that he was part of a generation and in a lot of ways a principal agent in kind of breaking down a lot of social taboos that had existed until, and one of which, of course, was that, you know, daddy knows best, Uncle Sam requires your service, don't ask, don't tell, this whole sort of mentality of, you know, subservience to the American project. And I think, you know, to some extent, Warhol really didn't have a political bone in his body. I don't think, you know, he was particularly, you know, I don't think he lost any sleep over Vietnam, for example. But I do think that the fact that he was using photographs for his Death and Disaster series that were too shocking or too gruesome to be published in major magazines like Time and Newsweek, you know, speaks to that fact that Warhol was willing to show people things that they had probably never really seen before. In the same way, as Tom was saying about the films, the fact that film is different from painting, you know, partly resides in the fact that it participates in what Walter Benjamin calls the optical unconscious. It's capable of capturing aspects of reality from a point of view from which we've never seen it before. Just like the Freudian joke that reveals a great deal about a person. It gives us information that we simply didn't have before. So in terms of whether, I'm not sure that the American educational system has become less efficient in brainwashing people. We've just had 30 years of Republican dominance there, so I wouldn't say that people are less enamored of their founding myths. And I don't mean to say that as sort of, you know, Republicans bad, Democrats good. I mean, you know, Obama is constantly mouthing very, you know, flattering slogans to the American middle class about its unique virtue and its place in history as prime catalyst of goodness in other countries. So I think that, you know, the educational system is really, to some extent, a reflection of an abiding belief among Americans in their unique historical role, in the universal applicability of American ideas. And I think also in, you know, and to a certain extent, someone like Obama represents a little bit that has to change so that everything can remain the same. But that's my personal opinion. I'll pass it on to Tom.
I guess I think a little differently, and I would say here I'm going to sort of diminish Warhol's role. I would say probably the person who had the biggest effect on sort of maybe where education or the American mentality goes was William Paley of CBS News, because I think it was American television during the 1960s. I mean, I was born in 1950, so that gives you my age context. And I remember, you know, growing up, and we in the Midwest would have dinner at 5 o'clock, and you would have the TV on in the background, because the TV is always on in America, and I'm sure everywhere as well nowadays. And you'd be having your plain old dinner, whether mom was a good cook or not, and watching whether it was people being beaten in the streets with our American Civil Rights Movement, and there are 2 prints from that Warhol has in this exhibition that Phillip's chosen, and then Vietnam. And I mean, for years, Vietnam with horrible scenes of napalm, and when Buddhist monks would set themselves on fire, or children being burning with napalm. They were these grand guignol scenes that were so unbelievable. And yet, at the same time, I think it was not even so much, from my point of view, you know, any kind of American imperialism, but just like anything else, you become inured to it. And here's where Warhol comes in. Some of you may remember, I guess now it's about 5 years ago, there was this clandestine filming of an event where in Los Angeles, the police beat this one African-American fellow who was pulled out of a car for driving around the wrong lane or something or other, and this man kept resisting. His name was Rodney King. And it was this horrendous film, and you're thinking that our police system is beating the hell out of this man who was just resisting, and it turned out maybe Rodney King was partly mentally disturbed, et cetera, et cetera. And the first time you saw it, you thought, you know, that can't happen in America. That happens in Russia, et cetera. But then you saw it again, and again, and again, and again. And after a while, just because I think as human beings, and this has nothing to do with being an American or not, you just say, you know, I can't take it anymore, so it just becomes wallpaper. And I think Warhol played with that too, because when I mentioned William Paley, I think the notion, what Warhol learned, and I think for him, the most crucial moment for him was the Kennedy assassination. Because what was very interesting, and when I talk about it, because I was 13 years old, so old enough, I certainly didn't know I was going to do what I was going to do or be a cultural whatever I am. But we all watched, in America, it was the first time that TV was on 24 hours a day. And we saw every bit and piece, and we saw it over and over again, and it was like a magical story because we didn't really know who did what, who shot President Kennedy. But one thing you learned was everyone's memory of that event was exactly the same, because unless you were there in the South, in Dallas, all you saw is what TV gave you. So you saw that image. So the person who took the photograph, the editor for TV or magazines or whatever, you cropped it, and then it was placed. So if you were of the same age, oh, I remember. And so those of you who were old enough in the audience remember when John Kennedy saluted the little boy, and that was his mother telling him to do that. But these are indelible images, and I think what Warhol learned, and we now know it, indelibly all over the world, that whenever a tragedy comes, the camera is right there. And they're there. I always joke at one of our newscasters, Katie Couric, who's this pricky little girl, and she's always there. When someone's killed in Uganda, she's there the next day, petting an elephant and then talking to the president's widow. That we never, ever again in this world, unless we have sort of epidermal abrasion, we never are going to look at anything, good or bad, uninflected. So I would say it was Warhol distilling something, but I think it's the press. It is absolutely the press and the 50 Minutes of Fame, because you got to fill TV. And Coca-Cola or presidential election where is going to pay for the ads, but you got to fill those hours of TV. So it's just over and over repetition. And I think that's what Warhol saw, and that's what really changed it, even more than he.